In a quiet corner of San Antonio, Texas, a retired healthcare worker named Nell began to realize that the life she had built was no longer hers alone. It started with the mundane inconsistencies that plague a house: objects slightly out of place, a door left ajar that she was certain she had closed. But for Nell, the mundane quickly sharpened into the impossible. She lived in a world where the familiar was constantly being subverted, where the architecture of her own home seemed to turn against her internal mapping system, leaving her in a landscape of uncertainty. This was not a sudden onset of terror. The roots of this disturbance reached back into Nell's childhood, a time when her family spoke openly about the spirits that allegedly shared their home. One memory stood out with jagged clarity: a toy doll that did not merely sit on a shelf, but reportedly came to life and snarled at her. It was the first fracture in the boundary between the subconscious and the physical world, a boundary that, for Nell, would remain dangerously thin for the rest of her life. By 2011, Nell was living in what researchers would later call Residence A. She was a woman of high transliminality, meaning her mental boundaries were exceptionally permeable, allowing the dis-ease of everyday stress to leak into her sensory perceptions. In this house, the activity graduated from faint scratching noises, the kind one might disregard as rodents or settling pipes, into something that demanded her attention. She would lie in bed and feel a weight, like a heavy presence sitting at the foot of the mattress, stroking her legs. Sometimes a male voice would call her name in a thick, labored whisper, not from the hallway, but from the stereo speakers in her room. The fear was not hers alone. In a phenomenon known as psychological contagion, the detection of these anomalies began to spread through her family like an invisible illness. Her second husband, Rod, and her adult daughter, Jill, began to report their own brushes with the unseen. They found themselves trapped in a narrative vacuum where the brain, struggling to make sense of ambiguous stimuli, begins to write its own stories of danger and loss. This shared belief system became a coping mechanism, a way to categorize the complexity of an environment that felt increasingly hostile. In a desperate attempt to find peace, the family moved. Then they moved again and again. Over the next 10 years, they would inhabit 5 successive residences, A through E. Each move a failed attempt to outrun a haunting that was not anchored to a location, but to the people themselves. In these maze-like corridors and repeating rooms, each junction began to look identical, stripping away the landmarks the brain relies on for navigation. Nell's anxiety was tied directly to the proximity of these events. The closer they occurred to her personal space, the more the terror escalated. The disturbances eventually took a turn toward the surreal. Nell began to document what she called dimensional slips, episodes where, while performing ordinary chores, she felt herself physically transported to other realms. She described these transitions as feeling like an electrical current running through her body, followed by a cool, semi-strong breeze that hit her back as the slit to the other world closed. She spoke of the Brother Jerry realm, a space filled with vivid spirits and ancestral memories where she sought to resolve lingering personal conflicts. She described an underground realm, a descent into a space of the dead that mirrored the ancient Greek concept of katabasis, a journey to the underworld to retrieve a boon of knowledge. These journeys were so vividly real to her that they blurred the lines between psychological dissociation and paranormal transport. The emotional weight of these experiences was a heavy anchor. In one instance, a participant in a similar study reported seeing deceased friends emerge from a mirror, appearing vividly alive, yet when she reached out to touch them, she felt only the cold, dry fabric of a curtain. Nell's life was a mirror of this discrepancy, a constant battle between what she saw and what the physical world allowed her to feel. As the years passed, the family's situation reached a climax. They were referred for clinical evaluation, a process where the rigid lens of medical science met the fluid reality of their lives. A Texas board-certified psychiatrist conducted a diagnostic impression of Nell, ruling out personality disorders, but noting a provisional diagnosis of delusional disorder, a belief system that was not congruent with medical science, but lacked the other symptoms of psychosis. The story of the San Antonio disturbances is not just a tale of a haunted house, but of a haunted mind. It is a reminder that the human brain is capable of imagining things far more terrifying than anything that can be shown on a screen. For Nell, Rod, and Jill, the stone tape of their own memories, had recorded the traumatic like imprints of their past and was replaying them in the silence of their present. As the activity in Residence E eventually began to decline, the question remained: where had Nell actually traveled? Whether she had journeyed into the depths of her own psyche or the fringes of a strange physical phenomenon, the impact was real. She was a survivor of a nocturnal warfare, a woman who lived on the threshold between the visible and the invisible, where light becomes memory and perception becomes presence. In the end, the most dangerous predator wasn't a figure in the shadows, but the thin, permeable boundary of a mind that could no longer tell where the world ended and the nightmare began.